All right, so thank you all for joining me tonight. You're going to hear a little bit about protecting Edisto Island, a story of collaborative land conservation, because that's really what the work on Edisto Island has been from the very beginning. So the first place to start is with looking at the state of South Carolina as a whole, just looking at the state of land protection here in the state. So as of March 2025, there were just under 2 million acres of public protected lands in South Carolina and about 1.25 million acres of privately protected lands, totaling about 3 1/8 million acres, about 15% of South Carolina being protected. And if we zoom in down to the coast, in between Beaufort and Charleston, we'll find the Ace Basin. So the Ace Basin project was started in 1989, and it was set up to protect the confluence of the Ashepoo, the Combahee, and the Edisto rivers, where they met in between Beaufort and Charleston, this incredibly ecologically diverse place with this wealth of biodiversity and tremendous conservation potential that really had no land protection in it. And this was a truly collaborative effort. It started with private landowners bringing in land trusts and federal, state, and local governments to all sit at the same table, put aside all differences, all priorities, everything else, and just look at the Ace Basin as a place that was an irreplaceable, one of the last great places, as it's been famously quoted, and to just figure out how we could preserve this place before it was destroyed. And it has become the most successful landscape scale conservation effort in the nation. By what metric, I don't know, but that's what we always say. So, and when you look at the Ace Basin as a whole, it's about 1.6 million acres in size. And as of today, about 320,000 acres are protected, about 20%. That doesn't sound super successful, but when you zoom on in and you actually look at the core of the Ace Basin, which is about 400,000 acres, right here, just south of 17 and going up here into the Broad River, this is the heart of the Ace Basin, where the majority of effort is being focused. And that area is 51% protected. And that's all happened since 1989. That's why it's so successful. They weren't coming to the gate with thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of federally protected land. When the Ace Basin was started, there was maybe a few thousand acres of protected lands within the whole of it. And within a span of about 35 years, it's gone from basically no protection to 50% of the whole of the core area protected. And if we zoom on in even further, down here to Edisto Island, which makes up about 10% of the Ace Basin's core, we see the same thing. Edisto Island's about 42,000 acres, and about 21,853 acres are conserved. And with that, about 20% of that is protected by my organization, the Edisto Island Open Land Trust, another 20% by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with the Ace Basin National Wildlife Refuge, about another 20% by DNR with Botany Bay Plantation. The Nature Conservancy has about 15%, Lowcountry Land Trust about 10%, and then the remainder 15% is made up by Ducks Unlimited, South Carolina Audubon, South Carolina State Parks, and a few other small organizations. Overall, 51.9% of Edisto Island is protected today. But if you just look at the uplands, the places that can be developed, if you just kick out the tidelands, forget the fact that they're incredibly ecologically diverse and critical to be conserved, and just think about the places that are actually under threat for development, only about 43.6% of Edisto Island is protected, which bothers me, and so I'm working at getting the last 1,617 acres that we need to really say that 50% of what's at risk is protected on Edisto Island. And this has been done primarily through the work of land trusts. Land trusts like the one I work for are nonprofits that conserve privately owned land. What we do is in our name. You can trust us with your land. We help landowners protect land from being developed if they have a special piece of land that they want to see protected and they don't want to ever see it destroyed. We hold conservation easements that hold those conservation rights and protect that land. We manage nature preserves and other properties that we own outright, and then we steward both types of those protected properties to make sure that the conservation values within those conservation protections are being properly managed, properly put into place, making sure that nothing is being degraded passively. And at the same time, we also defend those conservation values from bad actors, from folks who might want to come in and try and unravel an easement or trespass into a nature preserve or that kind of thing. And there's many land trusts working all across the state of South Carolina, and as well as many right here in the Lowcountry. My organization, the Edisto Island Open Land Trust, works in western Charleston County, East of the Edisto and south of the Stono, we have Lowcountry Land Trust, who covers the entire Lowcountry, all 19 coastal plain counties. The Lord Berkeley Conservation Trust focus on Berkeley County. The Open Land Trust focus on Beaufort County. Kiowa Conservancy working on Kiowa, Seabrook, and Southern Johns Island. The Nature Conservancy, who covers the entire state, but has a strong emphasis on the Ace Basin and the southern Lowcountry. Ducks Unlimited, who also has a huge emphasis on the Ace Basin and the southern Lowcountry through their conservation of wetlands and waterfowl habitat. Then you've got more niche organizations like the Open Space Institute, who doesn't really hold conservation easements or own land, but they're able to go out, buy property, and then convey that over to natural resource organizations like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, or locally like Charleston County Parks or local municipalities in order to create new public land access opportunities. You have organizations like the South Carolina Battleground Preservation Trust that conserves wildlife habitat through the fact that they conserve battlefields and other militarily historic sites across the Lowcountry, and then organizations like South Carolina Audubon, who aren't really land trusts, but they do own and manage land directly for conservation benefit. And then you have other organizations like the Coastal Conservation League that defend conservation values at the larger macro scale, not necessarily on individual properties. They don't really own land, but what they do is that they protect the whole environment that us conservation organizations work within in order to make land protection happen. Then all these groups are also underneath other larger umbrellas, like the Ace Basin Task Force, which is interorganizational between both governments, nonprofits, and private landowners, all trying to work to protect one special place. You have the South Carolina Land Trust Network here in the center, who is basically a union of all of the land trusts within South Carolina, all working together towards a common goal of protecting the state, sharing resources, sharing ideas, having trainings and forums and that kind of stuff so that we can all work towards common goals. As well as the Land Trust Alliance, which operates nationwide to accredit and make sure that land trusts are operating to the highest standard in order to provide evidence for donors and landowners to make sure that the conservation work that they're funding and that we want to see happen is being done by an organization that has the best interest of the land at heart. And the organization I work for, the Edisto Island Open Land Trust, has a mission to preserve the rural quality of life on Edisto Island by protecting lands, waterways, scenic vistas, and heritage through conservation and education. This is a mission that I carry with me day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year after year. I've been with the Land Trust for 8 years now. The Land Trust has been there for 30 years overall. And I want to go back to the very beginning, not 30 years ago, but about 40 years ago. In the mid-1980s, a Hilton Head-style development was proposed on Edisto Island. Condos, golf course, high-rise hotel, marina, dry stack storage, the works, you name it. Smack dab in the middle of Edisto Island, right on the South Edisto. And this was, I dare say, the watershed moment for all Lowcountry conservation, because this development was stopped. The Prospect Hill property, the 1,000-acre property underneath it, how it was eventually subdivided through the conservation efforts at the end of the day, right over there, was protected. And this became the prototype project that defined the collaborative success that then evolved into the entire Ace Basin project, which is still going strong to this day, 40 years ago, formally founded in 1989, but with its roots right here on Edisto Island in the early 1980s. But this was also the wake-up call for Edisto Island. We'd taken our rural agricultural community completely for granted. And Edisto Island was spared from adverse development, not because all the Edistonians rallied together and stopped the big bad developer. It was national conservation organizations, regional advocacy groups, local governments, and a few concerned, determined private landowners from just up the river from us who all came together and made this thing stop. Edistonians played their part in that process, but we weren't the ones steering the ship. And so this motivated a grassroots effort on Edisto Island amidst all of this going on to get local zoning in place so that if something like this was ever proposed, was ever slated to happen again, the people on Edisto Island would have a say. They would have an option. There would be limits in place on what could be done where. And if something was to go outside of those bounds, we would have the ability to be able to at least voice our opinion and try and stop destruction from coming to the natural resources of Edisto Island. That was successful in 1985, and again, better zoning got put in place in 1993. But the founders of our organization realized that zoning was not the end-all, be-all. It was just the first line of defense. It was a line in the sand. It was a moat around the island that gave us a fighting chance, but it was not how we were going to protect the island. And if Edistonians wanted to see Edisto Island protected, we were going to have to roll up our sleeves, get our hands dirty, and start conserving some dirt. And so in 1994, the Edisto Island Open Land Trust was founded by Edistonians for the sake of Edisto. And where we work is, of course, Edisto Island right here, but it's not just Edisto Island. We also work in Meggett, in Hollywood, in Ravenel, Rantolls, Willtown, Adams Run, Parker's Ferry, the whole western end of Charleston County, east of the Edisto and south of the Stono. But we also wouldn't turn down a landowner in need or a good project on the other side of the Edisto River or in southwestern Dorchester County. And what we do is we protect land. We do this through one of two primary mechanisms, either fee simple land ownership, which is the fancy lawyer way of just saying we buy the land, and since we buy it, no one else can do anything with it. And then also conservation easements, which are a little more complex. With fee simple land ownership, it's often small lots unless someone just graciously decides to leave us a big piece of property in their will or donate it straight to the land trust. That's not happened to our organization. So usually we're able to buy small lots off the market that have a really immense value to the community or to conservation. And we manage these in multiple different ways, either as nature preserves for wildlife habitat, as historic sites to preserve conservation values, as scenic buffers to preserve some sort of scenic viewshed that's highly visible and highly important to the public, as well as also creating pocket parks in order to provide public access to the communities on Edisto Island and in the surrounding areas up in Meggett. And additionally, we can also receive property as trade lands, which is where a property doesn't really have innate conservation value. Maybe it's just a house in a subdivision someone leaves us in their will, but it has monetary value. And we can sell that property off and then use that funding to then conserve more higher priority land elsewhere within our focus region. And so that's something that's happened to us once or twice where a landowner has left us a property in their will. They've asked us to place a conservation easement on it. We've done that, but then we were able to sell the property off and then use that funding to then fuel further conservation. With conservation easements, it's very different. So these are voluntary use restrictions placed on privately owned land that are permanent and perpetual, at least with the easements that we work with on Edisto Island. So these can either be donated by a landowner, it can be purchased by the land trust. The land trust can buy a property or be given a property, place an easement on that property, and then sell it off, taking the loss on whatever that reduction of value is by getting rid of those development rights. Or with mitigation banks, they're required to place a conservation easement or some other form of conservation restriction on a property that is restored back to natural hydrology, and us as a land trust are able to accept those easements to make conservation happen in our local area. And going into how these things all interrelate, some of the modifiers on how we can actually obtain these things. There's a third type of conservation I also wanted to mention, one that we've not personally done, but another tool in the toolbox, which are deed restrictions, which are basically the same thing that a POA or an HOA is. It's not as permanent as a conservation easement, it's not as strong as a conservation easement, but it's way more flexible and it's way cheaper to get in place. This is something we prefer not to do if possible. We would prefer to have a conservation easement if at all possible, but sometimes there's weird edge cases where land can be conserved through deed restrictions where a conservation easement just doesn't make sense. Say if it's two conservation organizations and one just wants an extra check and balance, someone looking over their shoulder, we can have deed restrictions, but then we have the option to undo those in the future if some other land use comes forward that is needed to meet the conservation needs and priorities of those organizations. So we can obtain easements and fee simple properties through bargain sales, which is, as a nonprofit, people can sell this property at a discount, and that discount that they're selling it to us as is a charitable contribution. They can write that off on their taxes. So that's a way that, someone might buy a property for, 30 years ago for $500, dollars an acre, and then fast forward, 30 years, they're like, well, I'd like to get what I put into this property out, but I really don't need the $50,000 an acre it's worth now. So I'll sell it to you at whatever my cost is. And so the land trust gets a discount on the property, they get a tax deduction, and then that property is conserved for less than its fair market value. Trade lands, like I explained, is if someone gives us a property with low conservation value or a property that's already conserved in some way, shape, and form, we're able to utilize that to generate revenue to then conserve land elsewhere in our focus area. Wetland mitigation, all wetland mitigation banks, for the most part, at least the sort of independently funded mitigation banks that I'm talking about here, require a conservation easement to be put in place. And then carbon credits, something that's new that hasn't really taken hold here in South Carolina, but I think has great potential, especially with the state of the timber market here, to result in conservation deed restrictions or potentially even permanent conservation easements by protecting, native plants, by protecting standing timber, by protecting, bottomland forests and that kind of stuff, the carbon that's locked up in those trees. With a carbon easement, which then generates carbon credits, but then that land is also conserved at the same time because you're not really conserving credits if someone just cuts down the logs the next time the property sells. And I also need to dive into what a conservation easement really is, because it can be a complex thing to wrap your head around. It took me a while to get it when I started working at the land trust. In essence, it's just a legal agreement between a landowner and a land trust that permanently limits a property's uses. And it has a defined purpose of protecting certain conservation values on that property as written into the easement, the things about it that are inextricably needing to be protected. And then the land trust, when they take that conservation easement, has the responsibility then forever to monitor and enforce those terms of that easement to make sure that those conservation values are preserved. So why would a landowner want to create a conservation easement? The main reason is because they want to protect a special place from harm. People don't come to me trying to make money off of a conservation easement and get to the finish line. They come to me saying, I own a piece of property and it has something special about it that I never want to see destroyed. Those are the people who donate conservation easements. Additionally, with family lands, it makes a lot of sense when that land to, as one of our former directors said, child-proof your lands. If you have a kid who doesn't really share the same conservation or land ethic as their parents, or they don't have the same value in the property the parents do, some parents may want to put a conservation easement on the property to make sure that when they pass that land on to their heirs, that they don't damage anything that's really particularly special or cherished about that property, that it kind of sets limits, guardrails on how that land can be utilized in the future. And conservation easements run with the land. They're permanent and perpetual. That land can still be sold. It can still be passed down. You're not giving your land to a land trust. You're just giving rights. And I'll go into that in a little bit more depth here in a second. Additionally, on top of that, it may qualify for tax deductions. Like I said, as a nonprofit, when someone donates their property interests in land to the land trust through an easement, that's considered a charitable contribution. And there's special tax deduction laws and codes set up that donated value of land can be a federal tax deduction. It also may qualify for South Carolina state tax credits at a dollar per dollar basis on the number of acres protected. There's also a federal estate tax reduction for someone who's really got big bucks. And then also at the local level, this doesn't apply to all jurisdictions or all counties, but at least here in Charleston County, we've seen also property tax discounts. If someone's putting a conservation easement on the property that gets rid of the development rights, it's not worth as much as it did before. And they can petition the county assessor to say, I just reduced the value of my property through this charitable conservation easement, and they might drop their property taxes accordingly. And additionally, there's also grant funding available at the state and local level in order to pay a landowner for some of that monetary value of their land that they're donating. Not the whole of it, for the most part, at least here in South Carolina, but we're able to compensate the landowner. Say if someone is land rich, cash poor, they have generational land, they don't really have a tax base that they can use the write-off for, but they might be able to be compensated a portion of the value that they're donating that they can then reinvest into the land, reinvest in their house, or put into their will to give to their kids instead of subdividing the property. So the best way to visualize how a conservation easement works is to use the bundle of rights metaphor, which is often used in real estate to explain how a deed or a title works. So when you buy land, you're not actually buying the dirt. You're buying the right to do things with the space that that dirt happens to be in. And your title entitles you to those rights. And so if you think about that title as a bundle of rights, as a bundle of sticks, as a box of crayons, or the metaphor I like to use is a toolbox full of tools. You have all these tools in the toolbox that you can use to do certain things to the land. And, maybe you've got, a whole bunch of flathead screwdrivers and some Phillips head screwdrivers and 6 socket sets and all this antique carpentry stuff you inherited in your toolbox. And you don't really use it. You don't really want to use it. You don't want to break into the antique tools. So you can take all that stuff out of there, just keep, I don't need the metric socket set, and I just need a couple screwdrivers and a tape measure and a hammer, and I'll take all this other stuff and I'll put it into this conservation easement, this other toolbox. And I'll put the key in there, close it, put a lock on it, keys in the box, and I'll give that to the land trust. The land trust now owns the tools, they own the box, but they have no way to access them, no way to use those tools to do anything to the land. It's just, that's where the trust part of our name comes in. We're entrusted with the rights of that land to make sure that those rights are never exercised. And that's how the land is protected. By eliminating the ability legally for anyone else to ever utilize these rights on the property, that land is now limited to just, sustainable, compatible uses of that land that don't imperil the conservation values. There's checks in place, there's guardrails in place that make sure that land is only used in a way, at least to a reasonable degree, that it's not going to damage the important natural resources that are on that property. And how we as nonprofits, as organizations that are designed from the get-go to not make money, how do we fund doing land conservation? Because as we all know, land is not cheap here in Charleston County. Well, we do that primarily through donations of land. For the most part, people are donating some amount of land value when they're doing these conservation deals. And additionally, people donate us money or capital or other resources or in-kind services to help us get this work done. We're also able to apply for foundational grants in order to help fund for our operational costs, as well as loans for special projects and that kind of thing. There are federal grant programs around specifically for creating conservation easements and conservation restrictions, especially for agricultural and wetland easements. However, those are basically unobtainable in South Carolina. They have been for forever, and then now the additional federal weirdness that's going on right now kind of makes those an impossibility. There's a couple other land trusts who have gotten a couple bucks out of that with about 5-6 years of effort and a lot of gray hair. So it's really not something that's usable here in South Carolina. Really tremendously successful out in the Midwest and the West, the CRP and the Wetland Conservation Program. Actually, NACA and the National Coastal Wetlands Conservation, I take that back, those are actually really successfully used in the Ace Basin for larger wetlands projects, but the Farm Bill stuff is all basically off the table. But us, and our organization, we've primarily used the South Carolina Conservation Bank, but mostly the Charleston County Greenbelt Program. The Conservation Bank was founded in 2002 to protect natural resources and create new public spaces in South Carolina. The Charleston County Greenbelt Program was founded in 2004 to protect land for public benefit as well as for public access here in Charleston County. And to date, we've had 29 successfully funded Greenbelt projects here in the Edisto Island area. I think 4 of those were also funded in part with Conservation Bank funding. I've got 3 more applications in front of the bank right now as well. So we've been incredibly successful in utilizing local funding in order to get conservation work done on Edisto Island. Half of our conservation easements were funded either by Greenbelt or the Conservation Bank. But how do we find land to actually protect? How do we get a land from a prospective conservation property to a really protected property? How do we find those willing landowners? It's just trial, error, time, and luck. And this gift that I've got running through here is about a 40-page write-up and about a 12-layer GIS prioritization system that I created for the Land Trust in 2021. Because through using GIS mapping and software, we're able to best figure out the places on the landscape that have the most potential for destructive development, as well as the places that contain the highest conservation value, the most habitat for imperiled species. And that allows us to pick out properties on the landscape that need to be protected because they have either the most potential for destruction or the most conservation value that can be conserved. And that, as well as through strategic planning, allows us to decide how best to allocate our resources, our time, and our funding to get the most conservation done, the shortest amount of time for the least amount of money. However, the conservation easement process is entirely voluntary. You can't force someone to donate a conservation easement. It's not a donation then, that's coercion. But what we can do is we can go out there, we can share information with local landowners, but to be a part of our community, to talk to people and just let them know about what we do, the value of the work that we do, the value of conservation as a whole to the area, and sow the seeds for future conservation, because they may not want to protect their property today, but they might tomorrow, they might a year from now, they might 10 years from now, 30 years from now. Maybe they're not going to do it in their lifetime, but they might leave an easement in their will, or they might tell their kids to do so, or maybe their kids want to conserve it, but their dad's just being a stick in the mud. So going out, being a part of our community and letting people know about what we do is the real big way that we let people know how land can be protected and how they can make a part in conservation here in the Ace Basin. But drilling into the actual priorities that we have, when we're working off island, it's the same as any other land trust. We're looking to create connections between existing conserved lands. We also have a special emphasis on helping protect family lands and conserve family farms, because these are the people who have owned this land for generations, who have been stewarding it well. There's conservation value on the property because they own the land and they've been managing it that way. That's the big difference between the work that we do here in the Lowcountry, what happens a lot out west, which is where someone's managing a property, a endangered species is found, and the federal government comes in and tells them to stop doing everything that they're doing. The only reason it was there is because of what they were doing in the first place, kind of stuff. Here, we put an emphasis on the people who are managing the property correctly, are the folks that we want to help keep managing that property. And conservation easements can make that financially viable for a lot of landowners. We also protect habitat for imperiled wildlife. We conserve healthy wetland ecosystems for the ecosystem services that they provide for our whole community and for wildlife. And we also try and expand and enhance public land where we can. Poet didn't even know it. But on Edisto Island, we do all of that. But we also protect our scenic views, our grand trees, our local landmark, and our historic features that define our landscape. We protect the waterways that flow in between the uplands, and we also develop pocket parks for the use of our community, knowing that access to these natural resources is an important part. And then every acre, every single peck of dirt on Edisto Island is a priority for us to protect. But it's not just about the dirt for us. It's about water quality. I'm helping get enhancement work done for water quality all across Edisto Island. We have a bacteria pollution problem on the island that we're trying to fix. I'm facilitating scientific research in multiple fields all across the area on our protected lands. We're preserving cultural resources and have been for over 30 years. We're also now dabbling into historic preservation. We put a strong focus on protecting the aesthetic beauty, the rural character, and the traditional land uses of Edisto Island, as well as also recognizing the fact that our community needs access to nature to be able to express those traditional land uses, those things that define our culture on Edisto Island. But it's also important to educate the next generation, both the young who are growing up at Jane Edwards or homeschooled on Edisto Island or in the local area, but also the new homeowners who are moving to Edisto Island, who don't know about the blood, sweat, and tears that have gone in to protecting Edisto Island over the last 40 years. And woe unto us if we ever take this place for granted. Again, we protect everything Edisto for the sake of all of Edisto. This is what's called community conservation. It's where a land trust helps meet the needs of their community through their conservation work. This is something we have done for our entire existence before there was ever even a term for the thing. It's something that's in our blood, it's in our very bones as an organization. Now I've got a couple projects I want to show y'all that I think define the conservation work that we've been doing on Edisto Island. The first up is two conservation easements, the Keefe and Polk Farm conservation easements. These protect 140 acres of land on Edisto Island. It's right on the Edisto Island National Scenic Byway, and it protects one of the last generational farms still operating on Edisto Island. In fact, this is my family's farm. That's my uncle right there putting out tomatoes at our farm stand. So that's why I'm so passionate about this work. My family still has a place to farm, still has land that we're able to manage, still has our tie to Edisto Island because of the work that this land trust has done, because of the work that the land trust I now work for has done. This helps, by protecting King's Farm and Market, we have another local source of local fresh produce. It helps alleviate some of the food desert issues that we have on Edisto Island. It's a much larger benefit to the community, not just from protecting the land, from keeping development off of it, making sure that the natural resources are free and the wildlife habitat is there, but also by promoting and encouraging local agriculture to help keep the community alive and thriving. Right next door is the Keefe-Kinlaw Scenic Buffer. This is a property we just bought a couple years ago. It's only about 1.2 acres, a little tiny piece, but it's right on the Edisto Island National Scenic Byway. It's part of one of the live oak tunnels running down the byway, one of the few ones still there. And even though it's small, it's wedged right in between three existing conservation easements, right at a confluence of a natural wetland system, right on the scenic byway. It has tremendous conservation value, both from a public standpoint, from a wetland standpoint, and from a conservation connectivity standpoint, despite being just 1.2 acres. Further on the other end of Edisto Island, we have the Britton Family Lands Conservation Easement, which is about 48 acres. And this is 1/4 of the live oak alley, or 1/4 of one side of the live oak alley heading down to Botany Bay WMA. And so not only does this protect this historic landmark that we have on Edisto Island that really sets the tone, sets the stage for the entrance into Botany Bay, but it also is directly contiguous with Botany Bay. So it provides that habitat connectivity between the public lands and with this property. It's got maritime forest on one end and coastal wetlands on the other end. It promotes that connectivity, it promotes marsh migration, it conserves this space, and it also protects and enhances the public lands around it. On the north end of the island, we have Legacy Live Oak Memorial Park. This is a 29-acre nature park, but only 15 acres of that is upland. The rest is all marsh over here. Can't do much with that. But this is a pocket nature park that we're developing. It's right on the Edisto Island National Scenic Byway. It's one of our gateway properties. So when you come over the Sand Creek Bridge, it's almost everything you see on the left-hand side. Everything on the right is all protected under conservation easement. This is one of those properties that just defines what Edisto Island looks like to the public, but it's also got tremendous conservation value on top of that. And that's something that we want to interpret and promote through this small public pocket park. So we're going to be putting in a pervious parking lot down here and some earthen trails all throughout the property in order for people to access the property, and then also gives us a great opportunity to interpret and educate the public about all these various features of our coastal landscape on Edisto Island that need to be protected and conserved. This has been one that we've been working on for about 20 years. It was the first thing my boss showed me on my first day at work, and I'm still working on trying to get this thing done. Permitting is hell. The next one are 5 conservation easements together on the former Sunnyside plantation. So this is about 408 acres. It was one family. 5 different members of that family all came together and donated 5 separate conservation easements on the property. This property collectively as a whole has every single conservation priority that we look for on Edisto Island. It's protecting our water quality. It's preserving the view sheds from Store Creek and the scenic Peters Point Road. It's protecting imperiled wildlife habitat. It's got multiple structures on the National Historic Register, and it conserves active farmland as well. It's got all of the priorities that we look for. And this is a great example of how a family can come together, and even though they all have their own share of a larger family property, they can all collectively say, we need to do something, we need to protect this, we need to make sure that this landscape stays like how it is, while at the same time also conserving open space and wildlife habitat. And kind of the flip side of that is another fee simple property that we have, which is the Hutchinson House. So this is about 18 acres that we are developing into a public historic site. You can't actually access this one right now. Trails aren't open, but we have a little parking lot where you can come up and look at the progress of the house. We hope in the next couple of years to, again, have more permit work done and be able to allow much more advanced public access. But this is a property that was on the National Historic Register that popped on the open real estate market in 2015. We were able to take out a loan and buy this property off the open market from a descendant of the Hutchinson family, and we have been working for the last, what is this now, 9 years to get this property, or get this house restored back to its original configuration. That's at circa 1900, and open this up as a historic site. This was one of the oldest and best surviving examples of a freedman cottage built during the Reconstruction era on Edisto Island. It's a local landmark. It was a community hub for the island, and this has been a project with tremendous depth. I just spent literally all this morning in a meeting going over how we were going to interpret just a small fraction of the history of this property. We eventually want this to be a museum, a community space, and a hub for local African American history on Edisto Island. But at the same time, we're still a land trust. I've got a pollinator garden and a pollinator habitat project over there. One of the slides that Amber showed earlier was me out there pointing at this actual meadow right here in full bloom. This was an intact wildflower meadow, a true grassland, wild grassland on Edisto Island that was there when we bought the property. I've been doing my best to not screw it up for the last 8 years. At the same time, we also have a project growing a preserved strain of sea island cotton that was thought to be extinct. Dr. Richard Porcher himself thought sea island cotton had gone extinct, had been hybridized out. Well, it turns out the USDA's had it in their seed vault this whole time and they didn't have it labeled correctly. So this is something that we by chance happened to get a couple seeds from. And I thought the guy who gave it to me was, absolutely not. No way this is sea island cotton. Well, damned if I didn't find the paper trail. And so this is one small piece of this much larger project. It's such a rich project where every single rabbit hole we go down is just this amazing history and this amazing piece of interpretation. And then just up the road from that, I think this is the project that I think best defines community conservation, the work that we do, is the Edisto Island Community Recreation Area. So this group, the Edisto Island Youth Recreation, is a nonprofit on Edisto Island that works to provide free after-school athletic programs to underserved youth on Edisto Island, as well as in Hollywood and the whole Hollywood, Megat, Ravenel, Willtown area. They were looking for about 14 acres of land where they could build a ball field and a soccer field so that they didn't have to truck the kids 20 miles up into Hollywood just for them to be able to practice soccer. And we started working with them in 2017, right after I got hired. trying to help them find a piece of land. Well, this 145-acre property came up for sale, slated to be turned into a low-density residential development, and we went for it. We applied for funding, and we bought the entire property. We got them 30 acres that they could utilize to do all their wildest dreams, all the recreational and athletic field facilities that they possibly needed. And the remaining 110 acres, about 80 acres of active farmland, as well as 30 acres of riparian wetlands, were all protected in the process. So we were able to secure a place for much needed community facilities that we were not able to secure from Charleston County or through any other funding sources that they'd been trying to get in place for over 5 years and had not been able to make any traction. We were able to get their foot in the door, get them 145 acres, 30 acres that they can do whatever they want with. And now the ball is rolling, and they are hopefully going to have a community center, athletic fields, maybe even potentially a library on the site. This is a way that we were able to perfectly blend the needs of our community with the conservation work that we do. But it's doesn't just end there with individual land projects, because we also have several programs. So we have in the education outreach work that we do, the Young Naturalist Club. So this is a free after-school program that we offer 4th, 5th, and 6th graders to teach them about natural history, our heritage, and cultural history, you name it, on Edisto Island. Offered once a month to all the students at Jane Edwards, as well as homeschooled children across the region, where we introduce them to citizen science, to wildlife identification. We get them hands-on learning in the field. Some of these kids have never even been to the beach before. We're the first time that they get to go to the beach, having lived on Edisto Island their whole lives. It's crazy. And so we have each individual session structured based on the presenter's knowledge and expertise about something important to the natural history of Edisto Island for these kids to learn. As I mentioned before, we're also working to improve water quality. In 2019, we added waterways to our mission because we found out that 70% of our tidal creeks on Edisto Island were impaired with elevated levels of fecal coliform bacteria. This impacts not just swimming, but also fishing, public shellfish harvest, and there's unknown knock-on effects that this is having to wildlife, particularly native mammals, that really is not researched and understood. But all that we know is that having a whole lot of poo in the water probably isn't a good thing, and we should probably be doing something since no one else is going to. So in 2022, actually in 2020, we started work on the Edisto Island Watershed-Based Plan, which was published in 2022, that identified the most likely pollution sources as being failed and failing septic tanks. And solutions to that are pretty obvious. Get those systems fixed. So in 2022, not even before the plan was published, having known that, we started a pilot program for the Edisto Island Septic System Improvement Program, where we were doing an educational campaign to let homeowners know about the importance of septic system maintenance, because there is no sewer access on Edisto Island. Well, about 60% of the residences on Edisto Beach, but only about, I think, 10% of the single-family homes on Edisto Beach have access to a small municipal sewer system. But Edisto Island, the vast majority of the island, 90% of the island, 95% of the island, has no access to any kind of municipal sewer, and we probably never will. We're so far from everything, it'll never happen. So we're stuck with septic systems, so we have to figure out how to make them work, how to make them sustainable. And so we started an educational campaign to let homeowners know that you do have to do something with these things. It's not just a magic box in the yard that you never have to think about. You do have to maintain, you do have to service them, and you should probably not be flushing t-shirts and golf balls and stuff down them. But at the same time, we also recognize that there's a tremendous need in our community. There's people who are living paycheck to paycheck, who are trying to figure out, how to make car payments, how to put food on the table, how to be able to help finance sending their grandchildren to college. And the septic tank in the backyard that's overflowing is so far down their priority list that they're never going to be able to get to it. Not because they don't know it's a problem, not because they're refusing to fix it, because they just don't have the financial ability. So we also have a major financial assistance portion of this program where we're able to help low to medium income homeowners get their septic systems repaired absolutely for free. And with that, we've been able to repair in the last 3 years 55 failing septic systems on Edisto Island. And we don't know whether or not we're making a difference or not, because the only way that we have to monitor this, because there's no regular monitoring, is through DHEC's monitoring program, which comes out through the Shellfish Management Program, which is managed by DNR with like a 2-year lag time on it. So I have no idea whether or not we've made a dent, and I won't know until probably about January of next year how the trends are starting to look. But we know that it's an issue. I have seen things that you would not believe, and I'll leave it at that. Additionally, in 2023, we started the Edisto Island Christmas Bird Count, so we now officially have our own Christmas Bird Count circle on Edisto Island. If you've not participated in a Christmas Bird Count, it's awesome. It's a really fun, exciting event. Unless you don't know anything about birds, then it might be a little overwhelming. But if you're a birder, great thing, get involved with it. It's a great opportunity to contribute to citizen science. And each count within each circle helps provide a snapshot of bird populations all across North America. And this is used to help predict population changes and stuff for the birds that are here during winter, our resident birds, as well as the migratory birds coming from north down south. And additionally, a part of what I do is that I write our Flora and Fauna Friday article series, which gets posted to our Facebook page, our Instagram, as well as our website. Website is the best place to see it. Don't look at it on Instagram. They have a character limit. It's draconian, and I have to carve up my baby every single week to fit it on Instagram. But I've been doing this since July of 2017, and I have an online database of over 400 articles on native plants, animals, and fungi, as well as some ecological concepts, and every once in a while, for Halloween or a horror story, I'll do invasive species to scare people. And all of these are 100% written by me. They're all photographed by me. No stock images, no AI, none of that. It's all just coming right out of this maniac's brain. And with this work and having written these for now going on 8 years, I've come out with a book. I've published a book. I have books. They're right here. So that just was able to publish a book in February utilizing all of this. And I have plans to eventually make this into a series, do books 2 and 3 on the flora and fauna of Edisto Island and the Lowcountry Sea Islands. Another thing that I've been working on the last couple of years is what I dubbed the Natural Link Initiative. This is not an official thing, but this is a pet project of mine. I'm kind of running out of the land trust, which is where I want to link land trusts to naturalists, to researchers, and to landowners, because private lands are chronically understudied. And that's not because people don't want to research them, it's just because there's not a way to link people to these lands. Naturalists don't have easy access, they're not public lands. You can't just pull up and start looking at stuff, that's how you get shot or arrested. And researchers lack the time to make the connections to most private landowners. Some researchers have their own personal connections to certain private lands to do research, but they don't have a vast network of private landowners who want researchers to come look at stuff on their property. At the same time, land trusts protect private land, and we have a vast network of landowners who want researchers to come out and look at stuff on their property. But we have absolutely no resources for doing any kind of research ourselves. And a lot of conservation easement landowners, I'm not going to say all of them, love their land. And some of those just want to know everything that's there and what they can do to best protect that. And so there's a natural link to be made between all of these groups to help get researchers on private land to better study private lands, which then informs how land trusts on what lands are the highest conservation priority to go after. Land trusts are able to get the landowners opportunities to have experts tell them stuff about their property so that they can better manage that land. Those landowners can then provide access to researchers and naturalists so that they can go out there and either experience the property or be able to do research, be able to see what's actually out there, and then that all feeds back in. It's a whole system. And there's also plenty of volunteer opportunities at the Edisto Island Open Land Trust, so you weren't going to get out of this without a pitch for volunteering. So we throw special events every year. We throw the biggest, baddest oyster roast on Edisto Island. I see that with full confidence. Usually over about 650 people show up. And we always need help with a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily need to be special high-level stuff. We just need help tearing down, setting up, working a check-in table, working a shift at the bar, that kind of stuff. And here's the strategy. If you volunteer, you get in for free, and you eat and drink for free. All the oysters you want, as long as you work your shift. So sometimes tickets can be hard to get, so think about it. We also we need help with marketing and public relations, just letting people know what we do. Just, we have a social media person. We now finally have an outreach person, but we're just, part-time people for the most part. So doing fundraising, creating media stuff, doing mailers, that kind of stuff, just stuffing letters, things that we always need help with. For specialty grants, we always need expertise if you've got grant writing experience, or as well as just help administering grants and that kind of things. The Young Naturalist Club, they're always looking for chaperones, mentors, and especially presenters. If you work in the natural resources field and you want to talk at some kids, we've got a chance for you. Property management, either picking up trash, helping us with invasive species control, managing and taking care of demonstration gardens and that kind of stuff we always need help with. On the land protection front, the big thing that I need help with is I need ambassadors. I need people who just go out there in the landscape and just let people know that land trust exists and the work that we do and why the work that we do is important. If you hear someone who's thinking about selling their land or developing land, tell them to call their local land trust first and just give us a shot or something like that. If you see a property that pops up for sale on the open market and it looks like something that really should not be developed, call your local land trust. Let them know. Because, like I said, we're just people. There's only so much time in the day. We miss things. And also, if you were in a neighborhood somewhere out in a rural area and you have, there's a lot of land that's unprotected around you, you want to host a meet and greet if, you're buddy-buddy with your neighbors, just to give land trust staff an opportunity to come out and just tell people what we do, feed them some hot dogs, and, just put the bug in their ear that, we're out there if they ever decide that they want to protect their land. And we have multiple specialty programs as well, like our water quality program, like the Hutchinson House, the Christmas bird count. I always need good birders for that, as well as our Back to Nature presenting. We do adult education as well. That's our Back to Nature program, where we do what like I'm doing right now and talk at some people on Edisto about cool stuff about nature. And additionally, we always need help on governance. If you're passionate about this kind of stuff, if you have skills related to this type of field and you would like to help see more land get conserved in the Edisto area, we'd love to have you on a committee or maybe even our board. And again, I'm Tom Austin. I'm the Director of Land Conservation. There's all my contact stuff up there.